it's a good time. 4-2 Bears with trending up being the thing, coming off their first 3-game winning streak in several seasons. Everybody's feeling good, but I need you to be the pragmatist, Tim. I need you to look at that tape hard like you do every week and tell me, what did you see out of Caleb Williams this time around that's different from what you've been seeing?
I'd like to bring some more negativity. I'm just not I'm not sure I can. I think listen, I went back and I rewatched a bunch of the stuff this morning, and you kind of walk away and you think like, hey, the there was only really one really outstandingly poor clip, right? And that was the underthrown interception on a shot play, which like if we're really talking, hey, we've got a rookie quarterback, he's 6 games into this thing, we're 4-2, and the worst thing was a physical error that you just like don't believe is a like no one is gonna sit here and be like, I think Caleb Williams' arm is an issue, right? So it's like, hey, every once in a while one's gonna get away from you. You left it short. Let's give DJ a better shot at it. So to me, it's like I don't know. They did exactly what they talked about. Keenan Allen got more involved. They continued to dress up their screen game, which we had talked about the week before, of like, hey, the Bears all of a sudden are generating big plays off a screen. I just, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of positivity. The only negative I really have is I'm sure you guys go through this, but like hearing yourself talk, when I hear the intro for myself on this show, I can hear in my voice that it's like 4:15 in the morning mountain time, and I'm like getting ready for 4 kids to wake up and yell at me. So it's like I'm like, I got to find a way to bring some more juice at those early morning film sessions. But other than that, I don't have a lot of negative.
I, I like that.
Wait, who requires the early morning juice? Is it the kids or is it you with the focus? I need to know.
I got to figure out how to be like more like I'm just like I'm too monotone. All these guys are on Instagram. They're like, oh, I'm jumping in an ice bath first thing in the morning. That's not me. I'm not tough like that. I played quarterback my whole life. Never got hit in practice. I'm not a tough guy, so it's hard for me to get going first thing in the morning.
Knowing yourself is key. I appreciate the self awareness. I know you talk about play design in that intro. So let's geek out. How about that double screen ghost motion where Keenan Allen goes left and then DeAndre Swift goes right, and then they get the mismatch up the middle with Cole Kmet?
Yeah, I think that was. I mean, I really do think it was one of the more creative play designs. And then, of course, anything positive you say about an NFL team, X.com is quick to remind you that they suck, right? So it's like everyone tells you, hey, this has been done before. So I thought the play design was great. So the play before it, right? You guys know they run that same motion and they set up tailback screen.
Yep.
So then they come back to it and it's like, okay, now we're gonna act like we're gonna flip it out to two of our best playmakers, and then guess what? We got Kmet up the seam. I think if you were really the play design too on the tailback when they do a slow screen off of play action, right? True under center play action and to the tailback, but they run it off that, we call it machete, where both of the outside receivers run deep overs and they kind of cross each other. The thing that I appreciate about stuff like that is they scored the week before on that concept. So the week before, the route that DJ Moore's wide open on is machete, right? They run machete, they get the downfield rub. DJ Moore's wide open for a touchdown. The fact that then Waldron goes, okay, the next week we're giving those DBs machete action, but we're throwing screen to where it's like the DB's eyes are going to see that and they're going to recall, hey, they just scored on this. I'm flying to cover these deep overs. And then all of a sudden, if you get through the first, second level, right, DBs are 30, 40 yards downfield versus if you give them something that their eyes haven't seen before, they don't bail out of there as much. So like to me, it's like it's not only just the recognition from the shifts and the motions that I think they're dressing stuff up. It's the actual concepts that they're running to set up screen, or hey, we've shown you screen and then now we're going to take a shot off of it. It's really good. And I'm one of those guys. I think you guys know me well enough. I'm not like afraid to tell you, man, I was wrong. I was way too hard on Waldron in the beginning because there was a lot of stuff that I saw on tape that I'm like, this is bad. We've gotten to a point where it's like, it used to be the Dolphins for me that was the most exciting team to break down. The Bears are getting to the point where it's like, I'm most excited to see what they're running and then how I'm going to see this, show up throughout the NFL in the next 2 weeks. Because you guys know it's a copycat league, and we'll see that screen that they ran up the seam with Kmet for a touchdown. We'll see that 4 more times this season because other teams are going to steal it.
Wow. I mean, just that sentence alone where you talk about the Dolphins and what they are perceived to be, and now what the Bears are looking like.
People stealing things from the
That
Bears
doesn't even sound right,
offense.
Tim.
Hey, even Sean Payton stole from the Bears in 2020, the playoff game. They used that play the next week. It was the deep shot over the middle of the end zone that didn't work.
And Philly special was first run by Dowell Loggins. Let the record show that.
Listen, you guys are preaching the choir. You guys know last year, every Tuesday, it was a tough day for us. Right? We had spent Monday, and it was just, we were all in a dark place.
Oh, you didn't love the empty screen on repeat 10,000 times?
Yeah, crack toss short side doesn't get your juices.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it wasn't fun. And I think it's, there's going to be another game where we're going to get on here, and it's going to be tough, right? That's just the ebbs and flows of the NFL, no matter who you are. But I do think, these are probably the weeks that it's important to say, everything went Chicago's way. They came in with a great game plan. They executed it. And here's what I do think. That game started a little funky for the Bears. That could have been one that all of a sudden you kind of tense up. You don't call the stuff that you scripted. They stuck with it. And then all of a sudden it was a runaway. It was a runaway route like it should have been. And I just think that's exactly what we said. Hey, last week we said, what do we want to get on next week and say? And we want to say the Bears took care of a team that wasn't as good as them, and it was decisive. And it's exactly what we saw. And then it didn't hurt to see a reinforcement of, oh yeah, that's why we took this kid number 1 overall. That back shoulder ball to Keenan Allen in the end zone, there's not a lot of human beings walking around that make that throw. So to me, it's those are the kind of plays that reinforce. And then we saw a couple of times when the Jags decided, hey, we're going to try to run man coverage. And we talked about it last week too of hey, I think that's a dangerous game if you play man coverage against Caleb, because
you said the defensive coordinator should be fired if he did that.
Yeah, I saw you tweet it right when it happened. Where you go, you're like, hey, we kind of called this, which I appreciate you doing that for me. So that way I don't have to always be the one getting on there telling people, hey, I called it. I appreciate that, because my wife's been on me lately she's like, you don't always have to say me a lot. So I'm trying to fix that. But
I say self-promote, man. Nobody's going to do it for you.
You tell your wife it's we, baby. It's you and me.
Yeah, that's what I really need to do. My bride and I. So listen, she does hold it down, and she's really great at checking me, and you guys, So anyways, I thought it was a great one. I think it's one of those things that I just more or less, from doing this now with you guys and, the Bears fans, it's I just think it's more or less let's enjoy it, because it has been painful. We've been through a lot. I think there's nothing wrong with enjoying it the same way the NFL, they're going to enjoy it as an organization. And then you're just right back to kind of evaluating it and seeing how it goes. And I just think the fact that we're at the bye week and this is the end result, I don't think there's a person who wouldn't take this with a rookie quarterback, where the team was, to be sitting where they're at the bye, I think is awesome.
I think there's also something to be said for how many times we talked about the absolute failure of empty sets last year. And the fact that, yes, it's the Jaguars, I'm aware. However, they were still able to, with backup offensive linemen, execute empty well in this game. And that is a huge improvement from last year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes to Caleb's ability pre-snap to eliminate some stuff, right? I think empties where you see a quarterback really shine in terms of I don't want to say hey, definitively. Let's say 90% of the time you drop an empty play, all 5 are usually eligible to some degree based on certain looks, right? So the fact that Caleb, I think, as young as he is when it comes to playing quarterback in the NFL, the fact that he's able to pre-snap, kind of eliminate, okay, hey, I don't like this one, I don't like this one, and start his eyes on, let's say, maybe number 3 in the progression, but he's going to put his eyes there 1. That's why it's successful. And I don't want this to turn into a Caleb versus Justin versus other quarterback thing, but I do think that's helping this Bears team get to the point where, okay, hey, we can get an empty. And the other thing that I think the Bears do that's great is they don't always get into empty with light personnel, right? It's not always 1 back, no tight ends, 4 receivers were an empty, because then you got a bunch of skinny guys out there on defense too that, hey, they know what to do in space. What I always love to see is we're in 11, we're in 12, right? 1 back, 1 tight end, 1 back, 2 tight ends, and we're an empty, because you want to see some thicker ankles out there, right? There's no better feeling than a quarterback when you're in the gun, you look out there, you're an empty, and you see some thick ankles on some of our speed guys, because then listen, I've got a great matchup. No matter what paper football tells me to do, I've got a guy who's got an option route. He's going to be able to create space because, you got to think about this from like the beginning of an NFL linebacker's career, right? Those guys always are good hitters. So you got to think of them as Pop Warner players. They were hitting, right? And they were getting downhill and hitting. And then you think of them in middle school, they were probably big, strong, get downhill and hit. High school, same thing. College, same thing. Then you get them in the National Football League and you have a 4-2 guy and then all of a sudden it's empty with personnel grouping that gets them on the field. And that's an uncomfortable spot for those boys to be walking out there. And it's like, okay, hey, I haven't covered somebody in a long time in space. So that's what I really like that the Bears are doing too, is they get heavy and then they empty you out. So not only is it a spot where Caleb, I think, is great at eliminating stuff pre-snap, I also think then we dictate to the defense, hey, you have a limited call sheet because you're not normally in base personnel when we're in empty. And also, we've really got some great matchups out here. And then if you decide, hey, we're going man, there's no easier recognition on planet Earth than you put Cole Kmet outside as the number one receiver. You're an empty, and the linebacker walks out there instantaneously. Okay, I got man coverage. Let's kill it to a man beater. Or guess what? I'm Caleb Williams. I'm going to take a 3-step, and I'm going to, let you turn your back, and I'm going to go get 30 yards.
When you mentioned the cute line about thicker ankles, is that something that you coach quarterbacks to recognize?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's we joke about it in college, but like it's true. Like you see some of those linebackers, you see some of those big boys out there, and it's like if you got thick ankles on thin, we feel great. We feel really, really good about it. It's actually really big too in the CFL with all that orbit motion that they do.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I spent like 3 weeks up there before they fired me too. But it was like you sit there in an office and they tell you, they go, hey, Tim, just find a thick ankle guy out there trying to cover one of our thin ankles and let it rip. Because I was trying to learn the game 12 on 12. And you guys know me. I know some football, but then there's times where you're like, Tim, you're pretty dumb. And I think that's where you sit there and you go, it was easy for them to simplify it for me. And matchups are always going to be great. And the way the Bears do it by getting heavy and then empty you out, the thing that people take for granted, because a lot of people hear that and they go, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, Tim, because then you have three of, let's call it, you're not as good pass catchers out there with your back and your two tight ends, right? But that doesn't matter to us because we'll dictate formationally to where it's Keenan Allen and DJ Moore as the actual concept. Everybody else can be on a clear or a sit. We don't care. Whereas for a defense, you have to cover with everybody out there. We can design stuff to use our guys correctly, but if we're dictating to you that we're putting your bad cover guys out there, it's tough to cover. And I do love that the Bears are doing it out of a bunch of different personnel groupings.
Not only that, but they're not getting overly created with their motion and downfield blocking. Last year, we saw a lot of play design where there was a purposeful misdirection where your downfield blocker would go one way and the play would go the other. And that might have been a read or a check down as well. But in this case, when you see purposefully designed plays where, yes, that back or that receiver is going in the direction of everybody else, and they trust that those people ahead of him are going to make the important blocks to get the yardage, that to me says a lot of confidence in your play call.
Yeah, I think the O-line's doing a great, I don't want to say great job because we're still turning guys free, but I do think on certain plays, they're doing a good job of getting out in front. The screen game, I mean, if you want to say like, hey, what's the number one most improved thing of this Bears team? It's the screen game. Because I think, Dan brought it up last week, but I think it's like we would always talk about, it just seems like the Bears are the only team in the NFL that can't generate big plays on screen. And that just feels like a 180 now, right? It's like, it feels like I'm sitting there watching the game live, and there's times where I'm like, man, we got to dial up a screen here. Because it's like, it's been so effective. Why not, a 2nd and 6, hit them when they don't expect it, right? Because you expect it on 3rd and long. But I do think like the way that they're utilizing motion, they're not utilizing motion at a huge clip, right? But like you're saying, the way they do utilize motion, it seems more coherent than it was last year. It's been hard for me because it's just like I'm so excited about what they're doing on offense. I do want to preface, I do want to temper myself because it's like, we could be talking in 2 weeks about another Cole Kmet 3rd and 8 tight end screen, and I'm gonna get fired up. But I do think it's like we're going in such a good direction. It's really hard to knock anything going on right now outside of, there's some physical mistakes, but that's the National Football League. If what we're really coaching on our players is physical mistakes, hey, you got beat on a one-on-one here, or hey, you left the ball short, or hey, you dropped this. it's such a better thing to coach than missed assignments and turning guys free and mental errors. Like those are the ones that show you a poorly coached, poor leadership in the locker room type team. We don't have that right now. And I'm not saying it won't ever flare up because it's the NFL. It might flare up, but right now we're not seeing that. And I think that's probably the biggest positive sign, going into the rest of the year.
Tim, can I ask a non-X and O question based on something we heard earlier? And it was from our friend Stacey Dales at NFL Network, who shared more information that she got behind the scenes in preparation for this game. And talking to Caleb Williams and Matt Eberflus, she said that Eberflus described Caleb Williams as being so conscientious that he needs to give himself more grace and not beat himself up as much. And it sounds like it's something he does more during the week because, like you say, he had a bad throw and threw an interception, went out and threw 4 more touchdown passes. Yeah. But when he watches film, he's extremely hard on himself. When you're coaching younger quarterbacks and developing a champion's mentality, how do you make sure that somebody is appropriately self-critical without being overly so?
Such a good question. So psychologically, when we have a young kid, our thought is, I tell young kids this all the time at camp. If you're beating yourself up so bad that I have to turn into the guy who's just picking you up so you don't go in the tank, you're wasting your time, because my gift is coaching, right? Like, I'm good at coaching. Let me coach you. You just stay even keel. Believe in your ability. Stay even keel, and I'll correct you. Hey, why was that a bad throw? Listen, our front shoulder got a little high. We picked our back foot up off the ground. Our elbow led our hip, all that kind of nerdy football stuff. I can coach you on that unless I'm so busy trying to make sure you don't go in the tank. So to me, what I tell Caleb is like, that's also a younger kid. When you get to coaching these NFL guys, they know so much football. You're more equals, right? It's not as much like, hey, I know more than you, let me impart it to you. It's more like, hey, let's be a sounding board for each other. I think as Caleb, I don't want to say matures because I think he's a really mature kid. I think as he maybe spends more time around people that view him as a football equal and want to use him as a sounding board and let him use them as a sounding board, I think he'll probably get more comfortable instead of feeling like I have to show these coaches that I understand how bad that rep was. He might get more comfortable of, hey, Caleb, I know that that wasn't great. Let's talk about it, versus I don't need you to show me that I don't need you to show me with your body language and your verbiage that it was bad. I know it was bad. Let's just correct it. Let's keep moving forward. I joke about it like Peyton Manning, some of those great quarterbacks where it's like they threw an interception, they start doing with their hands, right? Hey, you were supposed to run in, or that, there's that like almost like unrealistic belief in that they're not ever like wrong, right? Or they're not ever questioning themselves, that I do think is like that fine line of arrogance versus what's needed to go on the road when 92,000 people hate your guts and silence them. And that's what I would probably pour into Caleb if I was the Bears quarterback coach. If you dropped me in that room, I'd say, hey, man, I know how gifted you are with football. So when you go make an error, I know that that was an error. Let's, instead of that 30 seconds where you're so darn hard on yourself, let's skip that and let's just get to the resolution of me and you talking through, hey, how we're going to correct it. Hey, you didn't see that pressure. Here's why I kind of thought I saw it. I thought I saw that safety at 9.5, and on tape he was at 12. Something that maybe puts our red alert ears up and we start to notice, hey, that pressure might be coming. So that's what I would coach him on. But I do think that comes with, Caleb right now is still trying to prove to his team, hey, I'm a hyper competitive guy. I'm here to lead us to championships, not just we won in London, right? He wants to hold the Lombardi. I think he's still trying to show that with his actions. And I think maybe having a coach really lean into him like, dude, I know where you're at on the competitive spectrum. I know where you're at on your football knowledge. Let's skip the you beating yourself up. Let's just correct this and let's make you one of the best of all time. And let's go win a bunch of Lombardi trophies. I think maybe that's more the messaging that needs to come from, it's really the quarterback coach, not necessarily the OC, right? It's really that guy who they have that's strictly quarterbacks that could be pouring that.
And it's Ryan Griffin. Because remember, instead of having an old dude on the roster in the room, they hired like a Tim Jenkins like figure, in fact, in Ryan Griffin, who'd been one of these like fringy pro guys who knows everything, knows how hard he had to work, knows how perfect he had to be, and they've got him as an extra whisperer.
Yep. Which I think it's great. Now, listen, would I love to be up there in Chicago with you guys so I could come in studio every Tuesday and then be doing that? Sure. But what I will tell you is, like, I do think those kind of guys are great. And I just think it's that relationship is so critical. That's the one thing, you kind of heard Johnny Manziel, and I you got to take everything with a grain of salt because everyone's got a different perspective. But you heard Johnny Manziel talk about it in Cleveland when he said, my quarterback room wasn't a great place for me. And he blames Hoyer, but it's like, we're hyper competitive guys. Like, that's kind of not fair. So, but I do think when you look at it like that quarterback room needs to be a great place. And I do think that's probably the growth of that relationship will help probably Eberflus feel like, hey, this isn't, an issue anymore of him beating himself up too much.
Tim Jenkins, outstanding as always. Much appreciated.